Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is the 3.5 Prophecy. Now, this is building off of another lesson that we did dealing with the sackos or sackcloth, going into the book of Revelation, the 11th chapter. And I really wanted to go into this at that particular time, but it wasn't, the time, constraint. It just didn't allow for it. So I, said through the Spirit, if the Lord allows, I will go back over it in another lesson. And here we are. What you're looking at in front of you is something somebody made. I just found it online. It says prophecy, a reason for hope. And, this is what we move by. We move by hope, by faith, in the things that the Lord Yahweh Bashem Shai spoke of and prophesied before that were to come. And that is the reason for hope, because we see the prophecies playing out on the earth as foretold in the scriptures. Now, there is a particular time where these prophecies would be popping off, and the scriptures give us all different types of hints as to, the way events unfold, the way that prophecies, speak, and the things that they do and the things that they say. And this is why it's important to understand, of course, overall the gospel, which the prophecies are a part of the gospel, because the prophecies being fulfilled will bring in the, everlasting kingdom of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, which would be our kingdom, which would mean that once that kingdom is set up, the elect of the nation of Israel will be saved, because they are the first rulers in the first dominion with Yahweh Shai. So when we read scriptures like this in Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, it says, God answers the prophet, Habakkuk 2:1, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower. Now, what did Yahweh Shai tell the disciples many times? Watch as well as pray. And the reason why he said that is because one of the main things that we're doing is watching. Watching for what? Watching for the prophecies. And in the meantime, while we're watching for the prophecies, we're doing what? We're praying. And in the midst of praying, we're doing what? Teaching, feeding the sheep and the lambs of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai until the Lord brings this thing to a close. All right? It says, and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Yeah. So these are the things that we wait for. And when brothers, we see different things happening, the Spirit jumps on different brothers to bring out information at certain points, whether it's something to do with the MOTB, the Charagma, whether it be something to do with, World War III, or things, getting heated up over there in the Middle East, whether it be some form of legislation ushering in Jacob's trouble, or whatever the case may be, whether it be, some type of legislation or strike or something going on with food shortages, or, just shortages in general that will bring upon the famine. And another one that we really can't speak about too tough are the pestilences, But all of these are things, signs to look for, to speak about in this time that were prophesied long ago. Yeah, this is a good precept. I'll read it from the brother. 2nd Ezra 4:37, by measure hath he measured the times, and by number hath he numbered the times, and he does not move nor stir them until the said measure be fulfilled. Yeah, so because the Lord said through the mouth of Solomon to wake down my love till he be pleased, because there's a reason why the Lord does things the way he does it, because it's his program, and he'll do it when it's time, when it's ready, when the time is appropriate, that's, when it will happen. Just read this other precept the brother put up. Ezekiel 33:66. But if the watchman see the sword come and blow not the trumpet, and the people be not warned, if the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. Yeah, because that is the job of the watchman. See what's going on and blow the trumpet. And this is what the prophets are doing. It says, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. An appointed time means that there was a set time where this was set up to happen. Just like when you have certain places, you have to make an appointment to get a oil change, or or a transmission oil change, or certain maintenance on your car, or work that you need to be done on your car, or if you're going for a dental appointment, or whatever the case is. An appointment is what? A date that is set for a certain particular time for you to show up at and to receive the services that you had asked for. So the vision is set for an appointed time. The Most High set appointments and certain dates that he knows when these prophecies will be fulfilled. It says, but at the end it shall speak. Why? Because this is the appointed time, or when the appointment is fulfilled. It says, and not lie. Why? Because the Lord is not a man that he should lie, as the brother just put up on the comment board. It says, though it tarry, meaning though it takes a long time, because the word tarry means to take a while. Wait for it, because at one time the prophecies were kind of creeping along. Nothing was really happening. But then eventually what happened? The end started coming closer and closer, and the prophecies started speaking louder and louder. Because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Why will it surely come? Because we have a sure word of prophecy. And these things are sure, and they will happen. It's just a matter of when exactly it will happen. But we know that we're in the time because we see these things happening. That's why, as the picture that I have here, prophecy, a reason for hope, it's a good, I don't know who did this picture, obviously somebody that's into the scriptures. But prophecy is a reason to hope, because when we see the prophecies happening, we know that what the Lord spoke of is true. Now, everything is set up in particular time periods. Like the saying goes, two kings can't sit on one throne. When you have world empires of the heathens, which Elder Abba Bivens used to speak of a lot in his sermons. These world empires, they had a time that they had to rule and a time when they had to fall, as it states in the book of Psalms, the 75th chapter, right? So each one of them could not rule the known world, when another one was in place, because they had to take them down first to be able to do that. And this is what's been happening since the beginning of time. You had empires come up, you had empires go down, and then another empire will come in and take over those territories and resources that the previous empire had. Okay? Now, when we go to the book of Ecclesiastes, it's no different today, and we're pretty much at the end of the end. We go to Ecclesiastes 3:1. It says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. And this is true, because everything has a time to rule. When the Assyrian Empire came in, you had the Babylonians that were there. They were prevalent. They were making wars. They were conquering territories. But the Assyrians were at the pinnacle of their strength, of their might, of their height, of their empire. Then eventually what happened was, once the Babylonians conquered them, they were assimilated into the Babylonian Empire. That's why it was called the Assyro-Babylonian Empire in certain circles. Then after them, you had a group of Japhites, dark-skinned people, brown-skinned people, known as the Medes. And they were taking over the known world. And they took over the known world because Darius the Mede was the one that came into, Babylon and pretty much took over the Babylonian Empire. All right. There was no major war. It was just pretty much a translation. then the Persians were coming up into power, because the Medes were a power, to be reckoned with. But the Persians became greater. So they absorbed the Medes into them. That's why it became known as the Medo-Persian Empire. Later on in history, Alexander the Greek, or as they call him, the Great, came into play, and he took over the Medo-Persian Empire. So each time an empire took over another empire, they took over their lands, their resources, the people, and that particular part of the empire. So basically, as the phrase goes, they took over the known world at the time, because at that time that was the focal point, the metropolis, so to speak, of that whole region. The most coveted lands that had the most resources and where you could make the most money at. And that's why they were always fighting for those lands, especially the lands around the Mediterranean, because everybody traded by ships back then. They still do today. So now when we go to Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and verse 6, it says, because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. So everything that we see, every purpose that is taken, there's always time and judgment. For he knoweth not that which shall be, for who can tell him when it shall be right? And no individual that's out there that conquers, the known world, so to speak, they never think that they're going down. They're always on the defensive, because they know that people are trying to take them down, like that game you used to play, King of the Mountain. But at the end of the day, they never think that they're going to be taken down, especially Esau today with the type of military, arsenals that he has. You see? So they never think they're going down. And plus, that pride won't allow them to believe that. But we, on the other hand, see through the scriptures that it is so, that these nations have a time to rule, and they're going to have a time to fall. Luke 21 and 24. Matter of fact, let's get that. Luke 21 and 24. And this really began the end of the end. Luke 21:24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, meaning Israel. This is going back to 70 AD. And shall be led away captive into all nations. Because something about that 70 AD really pretty much put an end to Jake, as a whole. It says, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, the actual physical Gentiles, the natural Gentiles, unto the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Because the fulfillment is what? Once the last empire and the last people that are to rule and are taken down, that's the fulfillment. That's it. No, after that, never will a heathen step foot in our land, to try to conquer it ever again. So now we switch and go to the book of Daniel, the 9th chapter, and the 2nd verse. This is the prophet Daniel speaking. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years. And this is talking about Darius, the son of Ahasuerus. He understood by books the number of the years. See? Because he understood that there was a time period given to the Babylonians whereby they would rule and fall. Whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. So he understood this by what? By books, by the scriptures. Same way that we understand these things by the book, by the scriptures. Let's go to 2 Peter chapter 1, I believe it is. And verse 19, we also have a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well, that you take heed as unto a light that shineth in a dark place. And this Yahushua is that light that's shining in a dark place, in America and around the world. Until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts, which is Yahushua. All right. Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the scripture is of any private interpretation. Yeah, because you have these individuals that try to say that this is our interpretation. No, this is the revelation that was given to us pursuant to the meaning of the scripture or of the scriptures. And the Lord told us to go out here and proclaim it boldly. There's a difference. It says, for the prophecy came, and you could believe it or not. Inside joke. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man. See? Because when these visions were written, there were actually things that were happening that the Heavenly Father was showing the prophets in another dimension. It was like a hologram or a holograph, or however you say that. And they were actually watching, like you sit on your couch and you watch TV, or you might watch a movie and you see these images on TV and different things happening. This is what they were seeing. But it felt like they were actually there because the Most High transported them into that, especially like with Ezekiel in the valley of the dry bones. The Lord was sometimes, that's why it would seem so vivid, because they were like right there. And it's like looking at these things, like some of them got sick. Some of them were afraid. Some of them were praying that the Lord would have mercy on them, when all these things happen. So it was like a surreal experience, as they say. It says, for the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of the Most High spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. And these men were sealed before the world began. All right, now let's move from there. Let's go to the book of Daniel, chapter 5 and verse 25. Building on time, building on, a process of time that is given in prophecy. Because prophecy is a time calculation. The Lord shows a vision, then a certain period of time passes, and then the vision comes to pass. Hence, it's fulfilled. Daniel 5:25, and this is the writing that was written many tekel upharsin. And this is when, because remember, this is just before the last Babylonian king before he was taken down, Belshazzar. And this is why when this happened and Daniel went here to interpret this writing, this very same night, Darius the Mede took them down. So later on, when we get to the book of Daniel, the 9th chapter, and he said, then I understood by books the number of the years. Because in order for the land of Israel to be set back up in order, the Babylonians had to go down first. It says, I'm talking about back then, during the building of the second temple. All right. Or should I say the building back up, because they had to rebuild it back up because the Babylonians destroyed it. So that was like the beginning of the building of the second temple. It says, this is the interpretation of the thing. Many, the Most High hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. So there was a numbering. There was a certain set time that was given for that particular empire to rule. Job 14:5. Seeing his days are determined. The number of months are with thee. With who? With the Most High. Thou hast appointed his bonds that he cannot pass. You can't pass the boundaries that the Lord set as far as land, sea, and air is concerned. And you can't pass the boundaries that the Lord set as far as time. Everything is done time. Let's go to Job 21 and 20. His eyes shall see the destruction, and he shall drink of the wrath of the Almighty. So he's going to see his whole empire collapsing and crumbling. For what pleasure hath he in his house after him, when the number of his months is cut off in the midst? Why? Because they have a certain period of time to rule. Now we look up the word numbers. The word is mana'ah. To number, reckon, to number, to appoint. Remember, we talked about an appointment. So Esau has an appointment with destruction. But the higher ups, are going to hide from the Most High and from the wrath of the Lamb. They're going to make it through, and they're going to be the first to taste of slavery. And never ever will they ever rule again. So it was set for an appointed time. Now, let's go from there to the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's go back to Ecclesiastes, chapter 9 and verse 11. It says, I return and saw under the sun, the race is not that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, because you have these individuals, berating us, for not having scholarship, but the scholarship of this world is foolishness with the Most High. Nor yet riches to men of understanding. So it doesn't matter how strong you are, how fast you are, how wise you are, how much understanding you have. Nor yet favor to men of skill. It says, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Why? Because there's a time and a chance for every purpose under the heaven, as we read. And every nation had their time to rule. And now we're coming down to the end of the heathen rulerships to be ended. And the rulership of Yahushua, his kingdom, to be established, which the Most High Yahweh gave to him. So that's the times that we're coming into right now. Now let's go from there to the book of Joel, chapter. Matter of fact, you know what? No, before we go there, let's go to Revelation 11. Let's get into the time frame, that is written in the book of Revelation, because you have a similar time frame using similar words when you go back to the book of Daniel, the 7th chapter. But that was, Daniel the 9th. It's written a little different, But Daniel the 9th chapter, that was talking about in the kingdom of the Romans back during 70 A.D. So Revelation 11:3, and I will give power unto my two witnesses, on a deeper level, that's, Zerubbabel and Joshua. And on a surface level, that's talking about the two kingdoms, Judah and Israel. And they shall prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth, which this 1,360 days breaks down to 3.5 years or 42 months, I believe another term of it goes. And that is a representation of 3.5 years. But we know that it's not talking about actually 3.5 years. It's prophetic. It's talking about the 350-year period. And if your eyes are open, you can see it. Now what we're going to do, it says clothed in sackcloth, because during slavery, as we went over that lesson, you've seen the clothes that especially Judah was wearing. That was nothing but sackcloth. Esau was the one wearing the so-called fancy garments and all that stuff. Now, when we jump from there and we go to the book of Revelation 12, and we're going to come back to this. Matter of fact, let me leave that. Revelation 12 and 6. Now, the book of Revelation 12, like some of the other chapters in the book and in other books of the Bible, jumps in time. There's different things that are happening, and that's why a lot of times these books are hard to be understood, because sometimes they jump. You're in one thought process and you're thinking that that's the same thought process, but it's speaking about something totally different or at a different date. All right, so Revelation 12 and 6, it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness. Why? Because the Roman Empire at the time, during 70 AD, beginning around 66, 67 AD, started persecuting Israel and started a process of a siege to destroy Jerusalem, because you had a lot of rebels back then that were rising up against the government. Namely the zealots and them cats back then. So this is what pretty much precipitated the destruction of Jerusalem, which Yahushua has spoken about 30 plus years before, which was already written, hundreds of years before it even happened, during the time of Daniel. It says, and the woman fled into the wilderness. So when the Romans came, besieged Jerusalem, the ones that saw and understood what Yahushua spoke, they fled out of there. Into what? Into the wilderness. What is the wilderness? They fled down into the interiors of Africa. Some fled different places, but a good portion of them fled down into the interiors of Africa, because you had a lot of Israelite communities there. Although you had Israelite communities everywhere, but you had certain well-established communities there, and that's where they fled to, and eventually they would migrate into the western coast. All right. So it says, where she had the place prepared of the Most High. Now, this place that's prepared is speaking about America. All right. Because when Jake ran into the interiors of Africa and ended up where? In the western coast, roughly around 1,500 years later, that's when Esau started the slave trade. And they started bringing slaves to the Americas. But a good date when they actually really brought the slaves to America, which was in a bulk, was 1619. And that's why that's an important key date to understand and remember. All right, it says that they should feed her there. Matter of fact, let's build on the word a place prepared of the Most High, because there was a particular place that was going to be prepared to receive the southern kingdom for a certain period of time. So when we go to the book of, let's see what we got here, Joel, chapter 3 and verse 6, it says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold unto the Grecians, because what they did was they took the Israelites and they sold them to the Grecians, which at that time, those regions and those people that were being called Grecians or Greeks, in certain instances were dealing with the Edomites. Remember, this is the Old Testament. In the New Testament, when you read about the Greeks that received salvation, or the Grecians, that was talking about Israelites that didn't know that they were Israelites, and Israelites that knew that they were Israelites, but they were speaking the Greek language. All right? So it says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold unto the Grecians, that you might remove them far from their borders. Because at that time, under the Roman Empire, they were in Jerusalem. They fled out of Jerusalem, but they were still within proximity to be able to still go home. But the prophecy stated that we wouldn't go back there, until Yahushua came back. So it says this. So when they removed them from there, what happened? They took them out of the western coast of Africa, brought them over here to the Americas, spread them all throughout the Americas, and then you had what they call I believe they call it the triangular slave trade, which you had slaves coming from so-called Africa to so-called Americas and back to so-called Europe, so on and so forth. It says, behold, I will raise them out of the place whither you have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your head. So we're at this point now, because we have been raised up. How? Because the Lord said, put the spirit on the man called Elder Albert Bivens, who was the one that turned the heart of the fathers to the children and the heart of the children to the fathers. And this is why today, in 2022, the year of Yahweh Bashem El Shai turning up, we have this knowledge, and this knowledge has been spread worldwide. And plantation Christianity has been taught for a long time. They didn't have a problem with Jake with that. Islam has been taught for a long time. The FOI and all that. Esau didn't have a problem with that. Many other things were taught for a long time, and Esau really didn't have a problem with that. Now, some of them that got a little uppity, that tried to warn Jake that they were Israelites, they got taken out. Certain speeches, subliminal speeches they were given, they got taken out. But for the most part, they weren't coming up against those religions, Moorish science and all that stuff. Why? Because that didn't really affect Esau. Like this knowledge is affecting Esau of the truth of us being the Israelites, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians. This is a real problem, a real threat to them, because we are waking up to who we are. So the Lord said he would raise us up out of the place where we were sold. All right. And Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and, some of the other tribes that were there were brought over to this side of the world to fulfill prophecy. And once that prophecy was fulfilled, there was going to be a union that was going to take place between all of the tribes here in the Americas. Now we go from there to the book of Hosea, chapter 1 and verse 10. It says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place it was said unto them, you are not my people, There it shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living power. This is the place. This is the place that was prepared of the Most High. This is the place where they brought our brothers to, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and some of the other tribes also. And this is also the place where it was said of us that we are not the sons of the living power, even to this day. When we show them concrete, hardcore proof and facts in the scriptures, prophetic wise, that they won't accept. Because in their mind, it's like, if this is true, then that means we got to pay for having these people in captivity. And that's why they don't want to accept it. That's why they jumping through hula hoops on fire and daggers flying, and arrows flying with fire on them to try to overthrow what we're teaching. But Yahweh said it best. I will give you a mouth with wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to gainsay nor resist. All right. So going back to the book of Revelation 12 and 6, it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness. That's Israel fleeing into the interiors of Africa, which he had the place prepared of the Most High, because eventually from there we were brought over to this side of the world. And although Jake suffered hardcore slavery and all of that, right, that they should feed her there 1,203 score days. Here we go again with the numbering. This says 1,203 score days. This one says the same thing, 1,203 score days, letting you know that this is a link up. It's linked to this. So this same time period breaks down to the 3.5 or the 42 months, which all add up to 3.5 years, but we know it's prophetic. It's 350 years. All right. And it's no coincidence that when you add 350 years to 1619, you come up with the number 1969, which was a very heavy year in prophecy. All right. Now, let's jump from there in the same chapter, because when this happens, there's going to be an end to this. And that's when Yahweh Shai comes back. That's when it'll jump into the 7th verse. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon. That's at the very end. That's Armageddon. That's the end of the world. So from the 6th verse, we jump down to the 13th verse. It says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Right. So the persecution happened during during the Roman Empire, during 70 AD, right? It says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, a great escape, just like we had a great escape from Egypt. The same wording, almost word for word, is used in the book of Exodus. I believe it's the 19th chapter, if I'm not mistaken, where the Lord delivered us from Egypt, the same way as he's going to deliver us from the second Egypt. It says that she might fly into the wilderness, as we just read, so-called Africa, into her place, which is what? America, where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time. Now, in this case, it uses time, times, and half a times, which also adds up to 350 years from the face of the serpent. Okay, because here Jake was nourished up, even though they were given all type of abominations, but these devils kept Jake healthy. In other words, they kept Jake eating. And then even after that time frame or that time period, they had a lot of different, even though it separated the families, but it was also a way to take care of Jake also. The so-called welfare and different programs that they used to provide back in the 70s and 80s, But then slowly but surely they started pulling those away. Now, let's go from there. Let's go to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 50. Because that was 12, that was 11. I think, no, I'm still keep 11. Let's go to Jeremiah 50. Because once Jake's time, or so-called time, well, once their time of slavery was up, that prophetic time of slavery was up, even after the so-called Emancipation Proclamation, which was nothing more than a transfer of slaves from the plantation to the northern plantation, which were these corporate, facilities and whatever Esau had, these businesses. Jake was still catching hell. They were still going through hell. They were being lynched. It was still being, it was bad. Now, in some cases, Jake had certain communities, where they did well. Many communities, not just Rosewood and Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Black Wall Street. They had many places like that. A lot of them, according to the revelations that are being brought out now, are covered up by ponds, and different man-made lakes and things of that nature, because they wanted to hide that from the world. They couldn't have, the world knowing that these slaves, were able to, build up such communities and such wealth among themselves, that they were prospering without Esau. And that's why Esau was jealous. Brother said Wilmington, North Carolina. Yeah, there's a lot of different places. I mean, I know two main ones, and I know that there's a whole lot more. But in Jeremiah 50, right, after a process of time, as we read, as we just recently found out that the book that Elder Albert Bivens wrote back in 1950, it's no coincidence that that book that was written in the year or around the time when Ephraim really started coming into this country. Even though they were in Puerto Rico, they started really coming up here in masses. And there's a reason for that, because that was the Lord setting up the building and the union back together with the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And it's no coincidence that during the 60s and the 70s, the plight of the so-called black man, which is Judah, and the plight of the so-called Latinos, which are Ephraim, and the plight of the so-called North American Indian, which are Gad, we're all dealing with the same injustices from the same individual, these so-called white people, or the Edomites. No coincidence. Jake was in the slums and the ghettos. Ephraim was in the barrios, which is the same shit with a different name in a different language. Or should I say the same name in a different language? And Gad was in what? On the reservations, the res, which is the same shit. Just under a fancy name, but deplorable conditions. And they were speaking out against these injustices and police violence and all of that. There's a reason for that. Now let's jump down to the 31st verse of Jeremiah 50. And it says, "Behold, I am against thee, O thou most proud." This is the Most High speaking to Esau. "Saith the Lord, power of hosts, for thy day is come, the time that I will visit thee." See? So everything has a time. And this is why in Revelation, at one point in the 16th chapter, it says, "It is done." Meaning all the prophecies concerning from the beginning of the world till the destruction of America, Babylon the Great, Esau being the end of the world, were fulfilled. Now it's time to set up Yahweh's kingdom / the Israelites' kingdom and restore righteousness back on the earth. So the Lord said that there's going to come a time when he will visit these devils. And we read that in the Apocrypha, when I will begin to visit them that dwell upon the earth. And he gives a list of things that would happen. And that's why Yahweh said, watch as well as pray. When we see these things happening, we know that it's coming closer and closer to the downfall of Esau. It says, "And the most proud shall stumble and fall," right, because the Lord is going to knock them down off their high horse, "and none shall raise him up. And I will kindle a fire in his cities," which is talking about the nuclear missiles, "and it shall devour all round about him." Okay? But in the midst of this, it says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together." And this is why the Lord is coming to deliver us and to visit Esau, for, as we read in Isaiah 34, for the controversy of Zion. They done fuck with the wrong one. So the Most High got a controversy with them for what they did to his people. It says, and all that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. And we read that in Psalms, the 83rd chapter. We read about that in Revelation 11, where they send gifts one to another. They wouldn't put them in graves. This is the same thing that Pharaoh did to Israel, to our forefathers back then. When Moses kept going to him, let my people go, and he wouldn't let them go. So we're going through the same exact thing now. So there's no coincidence that the tribe of Ephraim started coming here in the 1950s. And then in the 60s and 70s, they were living in the same conditions, in the same places where Judah was living. You know, they were being persecuted, brutalized by the same man, the same police force, and whatever the case may be, that Judah was being persecuted by. Why? Because the Lord said that Judah and Ephraim, or Judah and Israel, would be oppressed together. This is all prophecy, biblical prophecy. And it all happened at the right time. The Most High don't make mistakes. He's the ultimate strategist. He makes things come together so sweet. You be like, man. So now let's go from there to the book of Revelation 11:11. It says, and after 3 days and a half, so after slavery, right, after the slave period was done, after, Jake went through whatever they went through, after the coming together of the tribes, right, it says that the spirit of life from the Most High entered into them. Why did the spirit of life from the Most High enter into them after the 350-year period? Because that was the prophecy. 1619, 1969. And that's really what, Spirit keep having me saying, that was a really heavy year of prophecy. The so-called moon landing, which didn't happen, but, Esau painted that narrative and people believed it. But that was prophecy in Obadiah. Elder Albert Bivens out there on the streets teaching. The economy, the degeneration of that golden city, the drug problems, the homeless problems, so-called free love, the breaking up of families. I forgot what year that was. They started to introduce the welfare system where the women were kicking out the man so that they can receive benefits from the government. They had a movie called, I believe it was Claudine. And they show you that. I believe that was James Earl Jones. And she had to hide him. She had to hide the stuff that he bought for her because the Edomite lady was coming from the welfare to check up on her, make sure no man was in there, make sure they didn't have any nice things. That was all prophecy. And it had to go down that way. And now you see where we're at now. So once the spirit of life entered into them through a man by the name of Elder Albert Bivens that spread the gospel, the true gospel, and men under him that picked up the torch and kept on going. And the torch went from Elder Albert Bivens to King Masha, High Priest Ariah, and High Priest Yaiquab. And then it passed on through into One West, down the line. Now you have Elder Apostle, the other apostles, the elders and bishops and men of great millstone. It didn't pass from Apostle to Alazar. The man is delusional. And they're pushing that narrative out there. Even Vocab is pushing that bullshit. You see? So you have to wonder, is there some kind of connection there? Is somebody that took the bag is also the ones that gave the bag to Vocab? And everybody's in cahoots with each other? So you have delusional individuals out there that think the torch was passed to them. Torch is not passed to you. Because there's nobody in Great Millstone that was worthy enough. Or however they said that. I said, what? But these are the delusions. But I digress. And after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life entered into them, which is the truth. And they stood upon their feet. Why? Because no longer were we those niggas, spook spicks, wetbacks that act like wild animals. Now there started to be structure. And that structure came by way of this truth that set us free mentally and made us better men to interact better. You still have wild animals out there that know that they're Israelites that still act like wild animals. But for the most part, the Lord is setting a structure of the men of the Lord in righteousness. Because these men, which some are of the elect, of the 144,000, are going to be a part of Yahushai's cabinet for the government of Israel in the kingdom of heaven. It says, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. So that's why everything happened the way it happened. Everything fits perfectly. Because the Most High don't make no mistakes. Yahweh don't make mistakes. Everything is set up in its perfect order. And this, what we're witnessing now, is the gathering of that peaceful multitude that was spoken of in the book of Ezra, which we're going to get that. Let's get that real quick. Sorry, let me get this second Ezra. Because this, when Judah, Benjamin, and Levi was brought over here, it fulfilled prophecy, but it did many things. Because in process of time, once the northern kingdom from the different islands started coming here, and the different places where they were started coming here, started uniting with Judah, started uniting with Gad. This was all the beginning stages of bringing back the tabernacles of David, bringing back the unity that was broken, the brotherhood that was broken. And, you know, I tell the story from time to time. Before the Lord brought me into the truth, I knew that the so-called Negroes and the so-called Latinos, that we were brothers, that we were somehow the same. But I just couldn't prove it. I didn't know how to prove it. But I just that spirit was on me. That belief was on me. That is so. And now come to find out when the Lord brought me into the truth that it is so. That's why the first day that I went to the school in Harlem at 1 West, got off the train, walked up the street, went to the school, sat down before, it was a Friday night. I believe it was Yeshaya that was going to teach that night. And I sat down as I was waiting for the teacher to come in. The row that I sat in, I was able to see the big sign. It was about, I'd say it's about maybe 5 feet by 5 feet, or maybe a little bigger than that. And it was a yellow sign. It was painted in yellow, and it had black lettering. And it's 12 tribes of Israel, Judah, so-called Negroes. And when I read Ephraim, so-called Puerto Ricans, I was like, it's like I let out a big sigh of relief, like, I'm finally where I belong. That's the thought that came over me at that moment. It's like I knew, but I just couldn't prove it. I didn't, you know. If somebody would say, prove this, I can't. You can't prove a feeling. You just know. So, 2nd Ezra 13 and 12, it says, this is after Ezra saw Yahushai coming and fighting against Esau, and, you know, they trying to fight against him, and Yahushai destroying them. So after this destruction, or in the midst of it, right, it says, afterwards saw I the same man come down from the mountain and call unto him another peaceable multitude. And this peaceable multitude was the gathering of all the tribes. And at this point, it was the elect. The 12,000 from the tribe of Judah, and the 12,000 from the tribe of Ephraim, and so on and so forth. And that great multitude of nations, tongues, and so on and so forth. Those are all Israelites coming out of all these different nations. That's that peaceable multitude that he saw. Now we jump down to the 35th verse. It says, but he shall stand upon the top of the Mount Zion, because Yahushua is going to be the judge over us, the king over us, underneath the Most High. And Zion shall come and shall be showed to all men. You see these people that you call niggers, spicks, spooks, wetbacks, that you used their labor without paying them, that you had so much disdain for, that you murdered, that you lynched, that you raped, that you stole their lands, that you stole their resources, that you sold into slavery. These are the people of the Lord. Being prepared and builded. It says, like as thou sawest the hill graven without hands. So that great chariot, that big chariot, was also a representation of the nation of Israel being set up on the earth. But it was actually a great giant chariot that Yahushua is coming on. But as you saw that great mountain, right, which Ezra thought it was a mountain, was also a representation of Israel, just like you had the vision where the city came down from heaven, New Jerusalem, which was Israel, the elect. But it was an actual chariot that Yahushua came on. Huge. It says, and this, my son, shall rebuke the wicked invention of those nations, Esau and the other nations, Moab, because they're all in cahoots. It's not just Esau building these missiles. You have other nations building missiles. You have other nations creating these different pestilences and different things that they're creating in their labs and all of that. It says, which for their wicked life are falling into the tempest, that destruction, and shall lay before them their evil thoughts and their torments, wherewith they shall begin to be tormented, because the ones of the elite among these nations that make it out, they're going to be the first to taste of slavery. And that's going to be the torment. Not what that asshole Bubbleye says, that they're going to be saved and only their cornfields are going to be burnt. And pretty much, they're just going to, the ones that believe in Christ, they're going to be, they're just going to be slaves. Fuck out of here with all that bullshit, dog. And shall lay before them their evil thoughts and their torments, wherewith they shall begin to be tormented, which are like unto a flame. And he shall destroy them without labor by the law, which is like unto me. And this is going into the multitude of these of the military that he's going to destroy. But also in the kingdom of heaven, once Esau goes into slavery, what's going to happen is after 1,000-year period, they're going to be rounded up and burnt, and there shall be none remaining of the house of Esau, none of them, not one. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, because the scriptures say that the Lord created the wicked for the day of wrath. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered unto another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which are carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Shalmaneser the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters. So came they into another land, which this was the land of Assyria, that they were brought into. And I believe in 2 Kings the 17th chapter, it gives you some of the different lands where Shalmaneser the fifth brought us to. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. And that so-called known world was already inhabited. There was no place out there that was not inhabited. So where did they go? They came over here to the Americas, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. And when you look at the river Euphrates, it dumps out into the Persian Gulf, which dumps out into the Indian Ocean. And you have currents. And those currents bring you all the way around the bottom of Africa and shoot you over to this side of the world, so that you could either be destroyed by those by the currents and by the different weather patterns, or the Lord can hold that back and allow safe passage, as it says or states in the book of, what is that? Wisdom of Solomon 14, I believe it is. Right here, 3. But thy providence, O Father, governeth it. For thou hast made a way in the sea, and a safe path in the waves. And that's what the Lord did for the 10 tribes. Showing that thou canst save from all danger, yea, though a man went to sea without art. Because it's the Most High that, gives safe passage. He creates good and evil. So going back, for the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. Why? Because they had to go, over to this side of the world, because this is the place, that would be set up as the gathering of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And it doesn't take a year and a half to go into those different places, in the region of the so-called Middle East. Some people said they went up to like in the areas of Armenia or something like some crazy shit like that they talking. No, it took them a year and a half to get over here. And we have scriptural proof that King Solomon, when he sent his navy to Ophir, that took them a year. It took them 3 years, a year and a half here and a year and a half back. That was 3 years. And that's why, the 10 tribes that took this council, they knew about this side of the world. Because Hiram himself, he had, experts, the Sidonians, which were experts in the sea. They knew all the currents. They knew which way to go and how to get there. They had traveled all over the place. So they knew about that. Because you had the navy in Tarshish, which was Spain, but then you had also a navy in Ezion-Geber, which is in the Gulf of Aqaba, in the southern plain. Edom, Esau, and Judah were always fighting over that land, always fighting back and forth over that land. It says in the same region is called Arsareth, which is another land. All right. Then dwelt they there what? Until the latter time. And when the latter times came, what happened? You had the Spaniards that came over here. They did what they did. Sent slaves on ships of the Taino and the different other, tribes that were here back to Europe. It says, and now when they shall begin, so the 10 tribes dwelt here to the latter days. And now when they shall begin to come, who? The other 3 tribes, the southern kingdom. When they shall begin to come over here, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again. Right, so that they can cross also. That's why the majority, or I'm not sure if any of those slave ships ever perished. I think they all made it over here because the Lord gave safe passage, because this was the land of punishment and also the land of gathering, to bring that peaceable multitude together, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. Why? Because you had the union of Judah and Israel, the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. It says, but those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. And these are the ones that were brought over here. Because eventually what happened to the ones that were in the border? They caught hell under the Romans in 70 AD. They had to flee into the interiors of Africa. They migrated into the western coast of Africa. They were taken by the Hamites, by the Arabs, and by even some of our own people. and sold to the so-called white man who brought him over to this side of the world, because that's when the union was going to be complete. Now, when he destroyed the multitude of the nations that are gathered together, he shall defend his people that remain, because you have an elect. And then shall he show them great wonders. So now let's go from there. Let's go to the book of Jeremiah. Almost done. Jeremiah 3:18. It says, in those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the what? North, to the land that I have given for an inheritance unto them. Right. And this is why it says, and let's go to Jeremiah, 16 and 14, which is also the same thing as written in Jeremiah 23. It says, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be said, the Lord liveth, that brought up the children out of Israel, out of the land of the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt, which is still talked about to this day. That was one of the greatest things that whenever people give sermons, they always talk about that. Whenever they make movies, they talk about that. But the Lord liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the what? Land of the north. So what great event that happened in the north land, or land of the north, overshadowed the deliverance out of Egypt? There is none. Babylon was in the north. The Medo-Persian Empire was in the north. We were delivered out of the land of Babylon. How come that is not trumping the deliverance from Egypt? Because those were not the lands of the north the Lord was speaking about. It's talking about here, North America, here in the Americas. So-called America, or North America. It says, but the Lord liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands whither he had driven them, and will bring them again into their land that I gave unto their fathers. And that's why all of the tribes had to come here. There's no coincidence you got the so-called Panamanians and the so-called Costa Ricans and the so-called Guatemalans and the so-called Mexicans and the so-called Peruvians, and Brazilians and all that, Mexican, all coming up here. The so-called Cubans, so-called Puerto Ricans, There's no coincidence that they all came to America. That was the Lord's doing to fulfill prophecy. Let me just check something real quick, because I think we could end it there. Let me go back. Is it second Ezra's? All right, you know what? Let's go here. We'll finish it here. Second Ezra's 2:40. Take thy number, O Zion, and shut up those of thine. Take thy number, O Zion. Why? Because you have an election that's going to be delivered. And shut up those of thine that are clothed in white. See? Those are the election that are sealed, which have fulfilled the law of the Lord. The number of thy children whom thou longest for is fulfilled. Why? Because the Lord fulfilled it. The peaceable multitude that was gathered together with their brothers, the southern kingdom. And you notice that even though the truth is out there and you have so-called Negroes, so-called Latinos, so-called Native American Indians out there in the camps, vibing with each other, chilling, teaching, you still have those that hate. You have those so-called, I call them Indians, that hate so-called Negroes. You still have Puerto Ricans that hate so-called Negroes. You still have so-called Negroes that hate Puerto Ricans and Indians and all of that. But the ones that the Lord is sealing up, that shit is not there, because he said he was going to remove the gaps. He's going to close the breaches thereof. The number of thy children whom thou longest for is fulfilled. Beseech the power of the Lord, that thy people which have been called from the beginning may be hallowed. And we're being hallowed right now by giving this truth again. It says, I, Ezra, saw upon the Mount Zion a great people. It's the same people in the book of Revelations, like the 7th chapter, whom I could not number. And they all praised the Lord with songs, to let you know that these people are Israelites, Zion. So those people that were brought out from those different countries, nations, and tongues, those are all Israelites, according to the prophecy. I, Ezra, saw upon the Mount Zion a great people whom I could not number, and they all praised the Lord with songs. And in the midst of them there was a young man of a high stature, taller than all the rest, and upon every one of their heads he set crowns, and was more exalted, which I marveled at greatly. So I asked the angel and said, Sir, what are these? He answered and said unto me, These be they that have put off the mortal clothing, and put on the immortal, and have confessed the name of the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Now are they crowned and receive palms. Then said, in the palm is representation of peace. Then said I unto the angel, What young person is it that crowneth them, and giveth them palms in their hands? So he answered and said unto me, It is the Son of the Most High, whom they have confessed in the world. Then began I greatly to commend them that stood so stiffly for the name of the Lord, which is actually the name, but also all of the different actions and things that these men went through to get to that point. Then the angel said unto me, Go thy way and tell my people what manner of things and how great wonders of the Lord thy power thou hast seen. And Barak Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, that he has given us the full picture of what's happening and the events that are leading up to the destruction of this devil and everything else in between, and the great gathering back of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Which all of these people that talk shit about the 12 tribe sign, a lot of them still use the 12 tribe sign. They'll talk shit about high priest Ariah, call him all kind of names, but then they still use a 12 tribe sign, which the Spirit gave to that man. The hypocrisy, man. But with that, I pray that you brothers and your few sisters have been edified. And to the next time I say, Shalom.